Yep, I finally did it. I gave myself a one-day time constraint and I actually finished a game made in Godot. This had been a long dream of mine, cause I'm always starting new projects and then stopping before I get anything that is truly finished. Even more so now with the YouTube channel, cause even though I love doing it, it does require me to make new content often and it can sometimes interrupt me during my gamedev sessions. So this time I decided I'd stuff all of those interrupted sessions into a single day and see if I could produce a minigame in that time. And well, here's the result. The game is called Mini Survival Space Quest. Let's say MISC. If you're curious, you can play MISC completely for free on itch.io at this address. The game is a vampire survivors-like that takes place in space, where you control a little astronaut fighting off aliens until the alien boss comes in and you defeat it and you win the game. Or you take one hit too many and you get to game over. Now, the game in itself isn't meant to be revolutionary or super hard. I wanted to make something that a reasonably focused player could beat in 5 or 10 minutes. And the thing is that I actually enjoyed this quick time constraint dev experience a lot more than I thought I would. So I decided that I'd share the game with you and that I'd also make this small devlog to tell you how I went about creating MISC, what tools I used, what kind of systems or Godot nodes it relies on, and all that sort of stuff. So I really hope you're gonna like it, and if you do, don't hesitate to tell me in the comments down below. You liking and sharing the video is still the best way for you to support the channel, and YouTube understanding that you wanted to see more of it, so thanks to you all for your feedback and your support. The game I've made is by no means original, especially given how the vampire survivors-like genre has boomed recently. I wanted to work on something I knew would work, and a type of game that I was clear on how to implement from the get-go. Plus, the idea of making this kind of game and having this cute cut-out paper aesthetic is a complete an homage to the real game a friend of mine is currently making. His name is Woum, and he's a really cool guy who's working on Kitty's Last Adventure, a super cute vampire survivors kind of game. So here, the paper layer helped me get a good contrast between my sprites and the dark background, but it was also clearly just a reminiscence of my talks with him. Because I usually struggle a lot with making my art, I decided that this time I'd dive headfirst into that, and just see how much time was left afterwards. So I jumped in Inkscape, cause I'm a sucker for vector graphics, and also that's about the only tool that I can use somewhat properly for 2D. I actually spent the first 2 hours or so preparing my player saucer, and then my 3 types of aliens and the alien boss. And of course, I also prepared a basic bullet and a coin sprite to give as reward to my players. So then I switched over to Godot, and I prepared my base project. For that, I actually used a pretty simple structure with just a game scene at first, and inside I had a starry background and my player prefab scene. It was time to work on the toy part of my game, or in other words, as explained in this amazing book by Juiciness, the most basic component of your game loop that will repeat over and over again and will be the simplest level of interaction for the player with your game. In the case of a vampire survivors game, I feel like the toy is mostly about having your hero move, auto-shoot projectiles, and escape enemies. So first, I set up my player and my test enemy, and for the player I coded a typical 8 directions top-down move system, like the one I talked about in this video, for example. For the enemies, the logic was super simple. It was just about continuously looking at and aiming for the player, and then moving at a constant speed. Then, in the game scene, I made sure to hook a camera to the node under my player instance to be able to recenter the view. I placed a few enemy instances, and I worked a bit on my background. To have it extend endlessly but still follow the player, I wrote a simple shader to offset the texture by a given amount, and I updated this value from my player script as I moved around. So at that point, I had this basic game prototype with my player in the middle and the enemies coming towards it. But it had already been over 6 hours. The next step was to actually upgrade all of this to get a modicum of gameplay. So I started by implementing my 3 types of enemy plus the boss, along with the unique data as project resources. And because I'd made 2 frames animations in Inkscape, I could use those little tile sheets and split them up as frames for animated sprite 2D nodes that autoplay when the game starts. With those prefabs ready, I set up a simple enemy spawner that has a list of waves and iterates through it to know how many enemies of each type to create, with a basic timer to have those enemies pop regularly. And if you're curious, the enemies are simply instantiated at random 2D positions around the player. Looking at my clock, I realized that I'd spent almost 8 hours on Misc so far, and I still couldn't hit the enemies, collect rewards, level up, or, well, any of those basic things that a game of the genre should allow you to do. That's why the following hours were spent on implementing the big systems for the game. So I first worked on the weapon system and the attack feature. I actually had my player bullets damage the enemies, and my enemies damage the player upon contact, so that I could kill the enemies to get coins, or get hit by the aliens to lose some health points. So in parallel, I gave my player statistics, so the health points and also the number of collected coins, and I added some basic user interface to keep track of this player state on screen. This was also a good opportunity to create a basic game timer in the bottom right corner, so that I could tell the players how long the game lasted if they managed to kill the boss, and a wave counter in the bottom left corner. Now about the weapons. I wanted the system to be fairly tweakable, so I devoted quite a lot of time to defining my weapon data template properly, and abstracting the weapon logic as much as possible. So thanks to that preparation, after creating a new sprite in Inkscape, I could quite quickly create the second weapon for my game, the Shard, that orbits around the player and deals close damage. Then I linked the coin collection system to the player's leveling up, and here my formula for how much a level costs is really super simple. It's just the current level times 10. As I was hitting something like hour 12, I moved on to the upgrade system, and so for that I had to do some low-tier tooling to have those project resources be automatically loaded by the game upon launch, so that I could get the list of weapons and upgrades available when the player reached a new level. Of course, I also implemented the upgrade pop-up that would show every time the player collected enough coins to level up, and I filled it with random upgrades or new weapons, depending on the current loadout of the player for this run. A couple of hours later, I'd also extended this system to include the notion of relic, which is a special artifact you have a certain chance of getting during an upgrade, and that gives you a global bonus during the entire run. But you can only take one each time, so you have to pick it wisely. Oh yeah, and it's also about that time that I added the second type of loot, the hearts, that can restore 3 health points for the player, but have a fairly small chance of dropping. Then, nearing hour 15, I finished my game loop by implementing the victory and game over conditions, along with the associated UI panels. And I wrapped up all of this with a quick main menu scene to greet players when they launch the game. Though, yes, again, I did have to battle a bit with my bad art skills in Inkscape for the logo, which took me another half hour. Alright, so at that point, I'd already spent way more than half my allotted time on the game. But I wanted to add an essential tool for immersion: sounds and music. For the sounds, I'll admit I just downloaded and picked from Kenny's great packs, though I took a bit of time to prepare a global audio manager that could randomly re-pitch sounds to create some variations. For the music, however, I really didn't want to go for a royalty-free track. So I opened up my DAW and I started fiddling with ideas. My first trial sounded like this. And in truth, it was way too electronic-y for my taste. Rather, I wanted to get something heroic, though slightly wacky too. I eventually did the best I could with my various virtual instruments. Again, for the curious, it's mainly the labs from Spitfire and a bunch of native instruments. Especially when, for some unknown lucky reason, Native decided that it was the right moment to send me an email with a free analog synth plugin, and so I could finally tweak my main theme instrument to perfection. So I eventually had about 1 minute and a half of background music that captured the vibe I had in mind, and it was pretty easy to integrate in my audio manager. By the way, in Godot, I made sure to put this audio manager as an auto-load in my project, so that those sounds, and in particular the music, would be cross-scene, and so they would play continuously from the main menu to the game scene. Of course, all throughout the dev, I tried to regularly boost the gameplay with little tricks. First, I added some acceleration and deceleration to the player, instead of having instant movement. This makes it a bit slippery, which isn't something everyone likes, but I think it's a nice deviation from the traditional Vampire Survivors game. Along the same lines, I also had the player tilt left or right as you move horizontally, with the rotation being proportional to the current velocity, which further increases the effect of movement. On another topic, I also gave the enemies a spawn animation and the player a hit animation, just to really bring those moments home. Then, to make the boss or player death more impactful, I prepared a tile sheet of explosion frames in Inkscape, and I created a little VFX prefab to instantiate on the defeated character when it receives the fatal blow. For the sake of smoothness, I set up a quick fade to black scene transition between the main menu and the game that is triggered when we click on the play or the back to menu buttons. And also to make the main menu a bit more lively, I made my large player icon move a bit and I added those aliens floating around. Finally, I added a simple shader-based full-screen effect that highlights the big moments, like leveling up, collecting a heart, or hitting a game over. At that point, I therefore had the first prototype version of Mini Survival Space Quest, made in about 22 hours, with the entire game loop, the weapons and upgrade system, the extra relic feature, quite a number of Juiciness improvements, and even some original music. Of course, there's still a lot more that I could add or improve, and this is clearly not an actual game. But I'm really super happy that I actually finished a game, and I'm honestly pretty happy with the result. But what do you think? Is Misk and this devlog interesting? Would you enjoy me making more of this kind of content? Feel free to tell me in the comments down below. Like and share the video, and subscribe to see more game creation content. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and take care!